Thank you. So I fully realize that putting a tax form behind me is not necessarily going to make me very popular. But it's to ask you an important question. How do you feel about taxes? Most people do not associate taxes with much happiness. And that would have to be an understatement. So we asked ourselves perhaps the most difficult question in economics, or one of the most difficult. Can we make people happier when they're paying their taxes? And maybe, just maybe, can it raise their tax compliance in the process? That's not a trivial question, I may add, because in the United States, there's a $385 billion tax gap. And in the UK, where I work, it's a £42 billion tax gap. That means that there's a lot of government programs that do not get funding. So if we can make the tax form slightly less frustrating and perhaps raise tax compliance, we can do a lot of good. So together with my co-authors, Michael Norton at Harvard Business School and Kate Lamberton at Pittsburgh, we studied this question. And we quickly realized that there's two psychological dynamics at play in the minds of people when they pay taxes that make them really, really dislike it. The first one is they don't know where their tax money is going. It's very different from going to the supermarket and buying a sandwich. You know exactly what your money buys you. That's not the case with taxes. The other issue that we identified very quickly is that people have a feeling that they have nothing to say in the process, in the decision-making process about where taxes eventually go. So to people, all in all, it feels like paying taxes is very much like dumping a lot of money into a big black hole. So no wonder it's a frustrating experience to them. But you'll probably agree with me that the two issues that we identified aren't all that difficult to tackle. On the one hand, what one can do is better informing taxpayers. So they make that psychological connection between paying up taxes and the public goods that they get in return. The other issue we can tackle by simply providing taxpayers with at least an opportunity to express their preferences about where tax money can or ought to be going. So we actually tested this in the lab. So we brought in about 200 participants. We had them play games. They made quite a bit of money. But we asked them to pay a 30% lab tax. Put it in envelopes and leave it behind you as you leave the lab. Of about half of the participants, we asked them a few extra questions, including, where do you think that we, the lab managers, should be spending the lab tax money at the end of the day? And guess what happened? The people who we had given a voice in the process, a bit of a sense of agency about their taxes, were putting a lot more money in the envelopes. So much so that tax compliance rose from about 50 to almost 70%. That's a big difference for such a tiny intervention. And we also asked people questions about how they felt about paying taxes. And even though these people who had been, that had been given the agency option were putting more money in the envelopes, they weren't any unhappier about it. To the contrary, their tax sentiment, their feelings about the tax system had actually improved. We then ran a second study to see whether the first one would replicate. And the second study, what we did is we proposed a tax loophole to people. They could take it, they could not take it, but the loophole was kind of a questionable one. They really didn't qualify for it, so it allowed us to measure tax compliance, or tax evasion, really. What we did in this case was to provide to about half of the participants, the treatment group as we call it, a pie chart of the US budget, the most recent one. But more than just providing them with information, we also gave them a sense of agency over it. We allowed them to play around with it, change the pie chart around a little bit, and give us a sense of where they thought the US budget should be going, what kind of distribution the public budget should be. Now, I want to make it very clear, just like we made it clear to our participants, that it's good and fine to express your preferences, and these will be taken into account. But it's obviously the policymakers in Washington, D.C., or London, or in Brussels that will be making the final call. At this point, it's not very practical to actually earmark taxes to specific programs. But maybe one day, but not at this point. Anyway, guess what happened? What would be the results? Did people take the tax loophole? Did they not take it? Once again, just like in the previous experiment, we found that people who had been given a voice in the process, who'd been allowed to play around with the US budget a little bit, even if it was only hypothetically, they actually complied a lot more. They were a lot less inclined to take up the tax loophole. And once again, it was about a 20% jump in compliance. So what does that mean? It means that if we can make the tax form slightly more interactive, we can raise compliance, we can potentially raise billions of dollars for government programs, while at the same time empowering citizens and making them feel better about their taxes. And the most amazing thing of all, it wouldn't cost anything. We all go through the tax process every year anyways, whether it's on paper or online. So our advice, our recommendation, give taxpayers a voice. If ever there was a win-win in public finance, this would have to be it. Thank you.